Hey, welcome back to Evil's Comics. I'm Evil Mike, and I got a review for you. We're going to be doing Night Terrors Week 7. I got some books to go over for you, but before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe on my channel. If you don't mind, it does help. Hit the bell. I don't have a schedule, just drop them when I can. Right, let's get started. No particular reason why we're going to go over them. All the writers, authors, the colorists, all the descriptions down below. There will also be timestamps below if you want to skip to a certain comic. So let's get started, right? First up, we got Nightwing issue number 2. Basically, all these are going to start out where they left off. We got Nightwing, he's in Arkham Asylum. Everything's a little wonky. He has been accused of murder with of Batman, so basically he's at this point he's trying to escape. Barbara Gordon is also locked up there, and she's all like computerized or whatever. Basically his cellmate Scarecrow gives him this map, which doesn't make any sense. Of course they're in the nightmare or whatever, but they try to break out but also try and get Barbara out at the same time. He does bring up questions like, where's the rest of the Bat family, and it is mentioned that they might be in Arkham, but basically they're trying to get out. As they go out, they go to this cafeteria situation where you see all kind of craziness. You got a Killer Croc that's actually like a Leatherface, like his he has a purse for a bunch of these are funny, man. I'm trying to remember all of them. There's like Poison Ivy as the plant. We got Mr. Freeze, and he's like made of ice cubes and he's melting. Killer Moth back here, and he's got the the light bulb, like he's thinking about it or whatever. But eventually we find out who the warden is, and it's switched. It's all of a sudden Harley Quinn. And for some reason she has 3 hyenas. It's kind of like a lunch buffet type situation. Like I mentioned, Barbara's kind of computerized. But eventually this is a distraction they're looking for. Harley starts eating all the inmates with their hyenas. And basically Nightwing ends up grabbing some keys from a guard. They end up escaping, which leads to another part of like it's basically a big maze or whatever. There's a whole bunch of dialogue that goes throughout this comic, but not a whole bunch that really matters. But eventually they get to this like scenario. It's like a circus scenario, and it's supposed to be his nightmare or whatever. By this time, Nightwing, he's still on this like whole like he needs to save Barbara, but at the same time he's not even phased. He's kind of figuring out it is a nightmare because stuff keeps happening. Batman appears even though supposedly he killed him. The ringmaster that's there eventually turns into Zuko, which is just insomnia. But eventually, it's supposed to be like, insomnia is supposed to be showing him his worst nightmare, his worst fears kind of thing. By this time, Nightwing's already dealt with all this, the guild that came through this. He's already worked through all this, and he kind of states this to Insomnia. And eventually they beat his butt. They make it out of the dream. Nightwing actually like wakes himself up by defeating the nightmare and Insomnia, shown here. Eventually, like, he does go over to Crane, because Crane helped him through this whole situation. At the very end, Crane's standing in the fire, and Nightwing's like, nah, I'm not going to leave you. And Crane's like, nah, I need to stay here for my guild, blah, 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 but I won't let you forget this kind of thing. And they go off. And that's when you can see Nightwing wakes up from the nightmare. But right before he does, he actually goes back to sleep to see what happened. Like, he didn't believe the nightmare was finished. And he actually goes back in the nightmare, and it's this scene where Scarecrow's talking to Insomnia, and basically he's like, man, this was kind of tailored for me being like the king of fears kind of thing. And in the end of it, you see that basically Insomnia is like, yeah, ha ha ha, and like Scarecrow, he ends up getting eaten by like all these flies, which he's happy while it happens. There's a line that comes from Insomnia, and he's like, it states something about like, the indulgence or whatever, as far as like where fantasies come true. But there's like this, I don't know, I'll just let you read it. It's kind of weird, but it doesn't really state anything. This one actually ends. But that's, most of them tell you that it's going to continue on a night's end or whatever. That one doesn't. It just ends. Next up, we have Catwoman, and this one is continuing on with Catwoman somehow awaking in a younger world, a younger Gotham. She's with her sister, which I'm not sure if that's a real character, Maggie, aka Sister Zero, or the Nun. And then she met up with this very young Batman that doesn't know. He's like year one, basically. He doesn't know Catwoman or anything. And it's all this talk about this guy that's being, basically the Joker is coming. The Joker is at this time in his rookie, scenario, and he's, but right at the start of this issue, like, the Joker's already there. They're basically like, he's broken to this it's a pet store, and he's messing with these snakes. He eventually sets it on fire. Batman and Catwoman eventually make it to the pet store to, rescue all the snakes and everything and stop the fire. And that's when Joker ends up, because they end up finding like hostages and people that have just inhaled too much smoke, and that's when we find out that one of them is Joker. And every time, because they meet up like twice in this book, but every time Catwoman meets Joker, she just beats the crap out of him. She's not into his whole, like she's already used to him kind of thing. But like I said, she goes like full blunt, and that's kind of like the whole like point on Catwoman's thing, is this whole like rage and especially since her sister's supposed to be this nun or whatever. But eventually at the end of this, they do catch Joker, and they do send him to jail. The cops come and take him away. The book kind of like fast forwards, of course, from a nightmare. They're back at this the shelter, and they're meeting up, and she's supposed to be going to mass to meet her sister. Bruce ends up meeting her there, like by certain happenstance. Of course, we're in the dream, the nightmare or whatever. They end up running into Maggie, and Maggie's kind of like disturbed because they went out vigilanting the night before, even though they end up saving a lot of people. But eventually they end up helping serve some food. They go to mass. After they go to mass, they talk to Maggie, and they tell her that because earlier with the fight during the Joker kind of told her that he didn't care about Catwoman or Batman because he didn't know him, but at the same time he was after the Maggie. He was after the Nun, and he wants to be the opposition in her life. Since Batman isn't there yet, and this Batman didn't create Joker, he doesn't have that opposition type of force thing, so he wants to be the devil to her godly force kind of thing. So eventually Selina's trying to convince Maggie to put on the costume, and they'll have to stop the Joker or whatever. Before that gets going, she goes to this confessional. We find out the Joker himself is in the confessional, and this fight breaks out at the church. They eventually do knock out the Joker. She kind of chokes him, passes out. While this happened, of course, Maggie gets pissed off because they're fighting in a church. There's this whole like, this is a place of God kind of thing. While this is going on, somehow Selina gets the Joker, and she ties him up in this like cell that's at the bottom of the basement in the church or whatever. As this is going on, as she has snuck him down to the basement, we also find out that everybody in the church suddenly starts getting immensely ill, and it's because Joker, he was using those snakes, and he poisoned like everything that everybody was drinking, so now everybody's sick. Batman and Catwoman have to go back to the pet store to try and find out what snake he had used kind of thing. They're trying to convince Maggie to, put on the sister, her alternate ego, the vigilante nun kind of thing, to go fight Joker. She's not buying it. Eventually in the pet store, these things appear, and they explain that she's focused on the Joker, and that's not right. That's not what she's supposed to be focused on, and she kind of ignores this, and they end up fighting these two snake type girls, but nothing comes out of that. It's just a distraction kind of thing. We have the scene where Maggie does go downstairs to try and get, beat the, what kind of snake venom it was or whatever, and eventually he does give it up. He reveals that it's it's part of a joke. It's some kind of like a snake that has a funny name or something like that. But eventually with the serum and everything, they do give it to like the rest of the church or whatever. in the end, right before Selena wakes up, because it's pretty much the end of the nightmare, because they basically defeat those girls, they make it back to the church, they give the serum or whatever. But basically what it comes down to is it had nothing to do with the Joker, and it's really like, it really goes into that anybody that ends up helping Selena ends up getting pulled into the world that she lives. So it's all about this like guilt that she has built up for pulling anybody, including Batman, or into anything that she's involved in, kind of thing, because everything that she's involved in is something bad per se. This is leading up to the Gotham war that's about to happen between Selena and Batman, kind of thing. So they're kind of pushing this whole like maybe she shouldn't do it kind of thing. And that's where she wakes up and she's just really thinking, should I do what I'm about to do, kind of thing, because she is about to go to war with Gotham. But that's the end of that one. Next up, we got Punchline. This one was fantastic, but basically we wake up, we go back to sleep in the nightmare with Punchline, and she's right where she was, kind of still stuck with Barbara and this weird mechanical thing. But on top of that, now she fades into this thing where it's like, basically she's stuck in like the internet. She goes through different parts of the internet. Eventually she has to fight these anonymous nothings. They start showing up out of comments and they spew nothing but hate. Basically, and I'm going to skim through this one because it was great, but basically in a nutshell, it's kind of summed up really easily. Punchline's nightmare is like, it's supposed to be this whole like, fear of the social media type thing. She's a social media guru, and it's all this like, you haven't dealt with the haters, you haven't dealt with the guilt that comes from them, kind of thing. And that's quite the different story when it comes to, Punchline, since she is a social media guru and she uses that to her villainous, efforts, with precision, I might say. She's done it twice. This nightmare isn't the best for her. She kind of like fights through it. There is one time where she gets sent to like this YouTube video, and as she gets sent to this YouTube video, she ends up like kind of temporarily getting rid of this monstrous Batgirl that she's been fighting. But she gets sent to the like infinite comment section, and that's where like everybody like digs into her, kind of thing. It's like, and she's just at this point she's muted, she can't really fight back or argue anything, and she just has to listen through all these countless like hate comments that have transpired over the years. And it goes back to like the beginning, but back to like Punchline understanding the algorithms and all that junk. All those haters and stuff were technically her cheerleaders, some of her biggest fans, and she realizes that. While this is going on at this point, like, she basically has figured out this is a nightmare, and it's just not a good suited nightmare, and she just kind of kicks the crap out of the nightmare at this point, basically taking down the monstrous like Batgirl, as you can see right here. And she does it using like social media stuff, like an enter button and a like, I don't know, different stuff. Like right here, this is how she exits out of her nightmare, because she finds the exit button at the top of the internet page, and she wakes up. And basically she wakes up right where she left off, and that's with the Royal Flush Gang as they were robbing that bank or whatever. But at this point she knows that she was being fucked with, and it looks like they're, her intentions are going to be routed elsewhere to Insomnia, because it actually says her story continues in Night's End, which I was kind of surprised. I thought it was going to be a one and done. Next up, we got Wonder Woman, and this one is a big one. But I'm kind of going to speed brush through it. But basically, we are with the Justice League Dark. We don't get to see a lot of them till the end. They're going through their separate nightmares, kind of thing. But basically, we have Wonder Woman, and she's fighting her, like, to me, it's a really cool looking version of, but it's supposed to be the like worst, most evil version of Wonder Woman, kind of thing. And that's what this is all playing on, that anytime Wonder Woman shows up, even though like she does save the day, she always brings destruction. She's one of the heroes that doesn't have a problem killing and stuff like that. And her nightmare kind of enforces that. Like, it keeps telling her like, oh, you're into this, look at your rage. And they show her what her rage looks like, and it's crazy cool looking. But basically, like, it's trying to guilt trip her into this, you love this a little too much. Every time you get the notion of battle or war, you get a little excited, you get a little moist down there, kind of thing, and I'm not making it up, but to the point where it's like it shows her what her ego looks like, kind of thing. But in the end, I mean, we're talking about Diana, we're talking about, daughter of Zeus, I mean, come on now. And basically, I mean, we got Diana, and she's already confronted all this. She knows exactly who she is. And that's kind of where, like, we're seeing a trend in these nightmares, is Insomnia hasn't really, like, he knows these people, but he doesn't really know them enough to, like, cast the nightmares to really scare them, kind of thing. But basically, Diana does like all that and admits to all this, even though it's a part of her guilt and stuff like that. She doesn't run from it. That's what makes her Wonder Woman, different from the gods, kind of thing. And eventually she absorbs that, like, monstrous, like, thing, because guess what, it is a part of her, and she's not afraid to admit it. And that's when she wakes up, and not too soon or too late, or because this big ass snake was about to eat Dr. Chen, because remember, they're in that middle of the maze type thing or whatever. But right when she wakes up, it seems that the whole Justice League Dark wake up. They are greeted by all these nightmares or whatever, and that's what it is as they were sleeping, the nightmares have managed to escape their dreams, and now they're in the waking world, kind of thing. But we do get Justice League back in full form and fashion. We do find out that with the lasso of truth, that she is able to, like, make the nightmares stop in their tracks, because she's able to make them face their fears, kind of thing, is how the book puts it. Eventually, though, they do make it to a, like, teleportation type of thing, but no, we find out they're kind of still stuck in a dream, and basically Wonder Woman has to go through and individually wake them up. And eventually we get to this point where they are at the bottom of the Hall of Justice, where they were originally, like, fell asleep, and they finally do wake up. Detective Chimp is the last one to wake up, but at this time it's not, Constantine does confirm that they are awake this time, not like last time it was like a ruse or whatever. They do run out of the Hall of Justice, and they find out that the world is being attacked by these nightmares. Again, Wonder Woman kind of does the same thing. She uses her lasso of truth, makes them face their fears. After that, they kind of vanquish all those around the Hall of Justice, and basically, Wonder Woman turns to Constantine, tell him, do your thing, and he creates this badass looking portal, and they're on their way to fight the hell out of Insomnia. They're pissed, kind of thing. And it says this one will be continued in Night's End. This one does have a second story explaining what happened with Nubia and the Amazons. In the last, she was fighting this horrific version of Gaia, which, I mean, is supposed to be the Earth, kind of, basically that's what her nightmare is supposed to be. We are with Nubia, and she's supposed, she was with the Well of Souls forever, and she was its champion that kept the world safe from anything crossing over. And basically, we have this thing that's trying to say it's this Titan or whatever, and it's trying to guilt trip her into, like, oh, you left, so now the world's exposed and left open and blah blah blah. And Nubia's like, nah, you just don't know who I am, kind of thing. I didn't just, like, become queen. I was voted and gifted, kind of thing. But I just, I wasn't gifted anything. I earned everything. And at this point, she just, continues. She just beats the hell out of Gaia, slices her, dices her. As this is going on, there's some souls that pop up that try and guilt trip her, like, oh, you left us. Why'd you leave us at the Well of Souls? Now, granted, at this time, it's well protected. It's not left alone. It's just, that's the only thing Insomnia had to use to guilt trip Nubia at this time. And it didn't really work, because at the very end, right as she sees those souls and kind of, like, explains that she doesn't have that whole guilt trip about leaving the Well of Souls, because it is guarded, she eventually wakes up and goes outside with, I think it's Evo, I forget her girlfriend's name. But she basically walks outside, and they see that the Insomnia wave is still going on. And it says this one will be continued in Night Terrors. Last but not least, we got Superman. And this one started out where we were in Superman's nightmare, And at the very end of it, Supergirl had punched her way into his nightmare. They're kind of going backwards a little bit and explaining like how she made it into his nightmare, but we're basically back on Krypton before the explosion with Jor-El and Cora, Supergirl, and they're basically going to like this old site that looks kind of like a doomsday skeleton, and all of a sudden, you know, the doomsday wakes up and, you know, starts attacking, and she's like, oh hell no, this ain't how this happened. I remember this day, and, you know, it was a sad day and everything because my dad died a little bit after that, but he didn't die this day. Nah, get out of here. But eventually that's when, like, you know, since that nightmare didn't work, all the versions of Supergirl pops up and start fighting her. She does say that she fought them for a good long time before eventually she got tired of it, busted out of her nightmare and made it into Clark's. And that's really where this story starts out right here. They're still finishing off all these like Supergirls or whatever, but the tag team of Superman and Supergirl, they you know, plow through it or whatever. At this time we get to see what is really going on in the real world. We saw a taste of it when Aquaman showed up saving I forget who it was, but basically we find out that Aquaman, Mira, and the whole rest of the Atlanteans are basically the only ones that aren't asleep, and they are around the world in different sloughs, you know, saving basically the whole world. I mean, the ocean is how much bigger than all the continents, and there's how many Atlanteans? Yeah, they're no problem. So basically the book explains how everybody else is staying safe kind of thing, which I love. But we do go back into the real world and we see that they are trying to wake up Superman. Aquaman and Mira have taken him back to LexCorp, even though none of them are friendly to that situation of being in a Lex Luthor, you know, building kind of thing, even though he's teamed up with Superman. But as this gets going and they try and wake up Superman, we get this guy that appears and he's some kind of blood knight. He starts going across Aquaman, but in the beginning you hear his name, Blood Knight, right? Fighting a guy that can swim. We do see something cool. We see Lois and where Supergirl is, and we see that Marilyn Moonlight is kind of, you know, since she's not affected like this, she's supposed to be a ghost. She's kind of hovering around Lois and protecting her or whatever. We go back to Superman and Supergirl's nightmare, or basically Superman's nightmare, and it's a Western. And she asks why it's a Western, Supergirl does, and it's basically because he's been wondering about Marilyn, and I think that's her name, Marilyn Moonlight, and basically when she came, like when she greeted Superman, she had showed him a vision of the future and the past, and it had something to do with Metropolis, and Clark honestly admitting that he doesn't know a lot about the past of Metropolis, and it's been weighing heavy on his mind, so that's kind of why his nightmare went in that direction. But they kind of show you, like right here, he leaves that quickly and just goes back to the planet. As soon as they get back to the planet, that's when they run into Lois, and it's because they merged in with her nightmare. Her nightmare is just a blank page, like, you know, she's so into reporting that that's her, that not being able to have a headline or write. But you see right here, the Superman, it incinerates this thing, and then we have this whole, like, you know, all of a sudden Metropolis starts, you know, just dying in front of them, and we see that Clark's real nightmare has finally found him, and it's basically, they switched the name, but basically now he's named Super Reaper. But basically at this point, it's like, you know, Supergirl telling Superman that the nightmare had the wrong, you know, outcome of that situation with her and her dad that day when they found that skeleton or whatever. And it's basically all about, like, fighting your fears face forward, and that's exactly what Superman does, and he beats the hell out of that Super Reaper thing, you know, to no end. You know, he just knocks the living crap out of it. But before, like, you know, all this kind of gets concluded, because he does destroy that thing, comes back to Kara and Lois, and before anything else happens, that they're waking Superman up in the real world. At the same time, we got, you know, Aquaman, he's over here battling this Blood Knight and everything. Of course, like I mentioned, he can swim, so he has no problem fighting this guy. And as soon as Superman wakes up, he sees what is happening, he freezes this guy, they instantly just burst him into nothing. And that's when Superman tries filling in Aquaman on what's going on. there is a very quick and badass gesture from Clark to Arthur about, you know, him saving the world, because that's what Arthur has been doing. There's also a side note. They also explain how the Atlanteans are still not affected by this, how they're awake, and it's because their eardrums, with the immense pressure down below, they have just evolved where they like, somehow this dream wave was sound related, and that's how it affected everybody else. It's something to note, I will say, because they kind of heavily hinted at it, kind of thing. But Superman just says that we need to go back to where all this started, which is the Hall of Justice. We get this last page right here, of like the dream wave emitting from the Hall of Justice. Last but not least, we see this shot from inside the Hall of Justice. I would assume is, or it could be back at LexCorp, I'm not positive. But we see something activating, and it looks like the Brainiac symbol. And that's where this one leaves off. And it says, to be continued in Night's Terrors, Night In. And it also says it will be continued in Superman Annual and the Superman ongoing series after that. But guys, this is my review, my Nightwing's Week 7 review. Please let me know down below if you read any of these, what you thought about them. Did you like them? I loved all these. They were all good. I'd say Nightwing was my least favorite. It was still good, but honestly, all the other ones were good. I'd say Wonder Woman was definitely my favorite in all of these, though. It was pretty dope. But that's all I got for you. I'm going to let y'all guys go. I'm sorry about the long video. That's all I got for you.